In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to make the Arctic Waves Bracelet. So looking at the surface of this bracelet, you're going to notice that it has some undulating wave sort of texture to it, which I really like. We've also added some crystal to it to kind of bling it up a little bit and topped it off with an infinite clasp in a matching colored cabochon to really give it a very custom look. We're going to start by making a ladder stitch base for our bracelet. And I have actually a finished sample here. So you can see on the back here I have a ladder stitch base, and then on top is where all of my fun colors and embellishment is happening. So I'm going to go ahead and start that ladder stitch base. And these are some beads that are a little bit hard to see on a white surface. So I went ahead and put that black surface, felt surface there. I'm going to begin my ladder stitch by picking up one of my 8/0 seed beads. And this is going to be my stop bead. So I'm just going to run my thread, my needle and thread back through that bead just to allow that bead or that thread to wrap around and get caught on that bead. And just leave yourself a little bit of a tail. You don't actually need that much of a tail because we'll just use this to tie off later. So I've got one of my 8/0s on. I'm going to pick up 2 more 8/0s and just let those fall down next to my stop bead. So now I have those 3 8/0s on. And this is as wide as my ladder stitch is going to be. So now I'm going to pick up another 3 8/0 seed beads. Oops. This felt is not the best beading surface, but it certainly helps you see the beads better here as I work. So I've got another 3 of my 8/0s on, and I'm going to pass through my first set of 3 8/0s, and I'm going to follow the same thread direction. So I'm passing through, starting with my stop bead, and then on to the second and third bead that I picked up. So I should be coming out the top of that third 8/0 seed bead that I put on my thread. So now I've got essentially 2 little columns, one column of 3 8/0s and another column of 3 8/0 seed beads. I'm going to take my threaded needle and make a little U-turn essentially, and pass down through that second row or set of 3 8/0 seed beads and pull that thread through, and be careful not to get your tail thread caught up in your project. So now my thread, the thread that I have here attached to my needle, not my tail thread, now I have my thread coming out of the second set or column or row, however you want to think about it, my second column here of my 8/0 seed beads. And I'm going to repeat this step. I'm going to pick up 3 more of my 8/0 seed beads, and I'm going to go through that previous set. And all I'm doing here is adding stacks or rows or columns of 3 seed beads every time. And then I'm going to pass through, again, make that little U-turn, and I'm just passing through the latest set of 3 seed beads. Pull it tight, give your thread a little bit of a tug just to make sure you don't have any slack and you're not getting any slack in there, so that your beads are sitting nice and tight together. And just continue like this for about 7.5 inches or so, however long you need the bracelet to be. You're going to make this base, and then we'll add the clasp to it. So the base can be about 1/2 inch or so shorter than you actually need the entire bracelet to be, because once you add that clasp on, you're going to add roughly 1/2 inch or so to the total length of your bracelet. So I'm going to go ahead here and continue with my ladder stitch, and once I've got that to the length that I need it, I will show you how to do the embellishment. When you're ready to start the embellishment, you'll need a few different beads on your mat. I have a 2mm crystal bicone, as well as 2 colors of 11O seed beads. So this will be my A color, and this one here will be my B color. To start the embellishment, I'm going to start at the very end here, where your thread should be coming out of the last row of 3 of that set of 3 8mm seed beads. So just for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to refer to these as rows because that's what they are. They kind of look like columns when you hold them this way, but I'm just going to refer to them as rows. So I'm going to pick up my first embellishment, and that is going to be one 11O seed bead, just one 11O seed bead, 1 of my crystals, and then 2 of my 11O seed beads. So I have 11O crystal and then 2 11Os. Coming out of this last row here, I'm going to skip 1 row, and in that 3rd row, I'm going to pass through the center 8O seed bead. And when you pull that tight, the line of beads that you just picked up should be coming out or starting at the last row of your 8Os. It's skipping and sort of just jumping over that 2nd row, and then you're passing through the center 8O in the 3rd row. So we're always going to work in this set of 3 rows here. So we're coming out of 1, skipping 1, and going through the center bead of the 3rd. I'm going to pick up 2 of my 11Os, 1 of the crystals, and then another 1 of my seed beads here in that A color, and pass through that first column again where I started, that first column of 8Os, or row, I'm sorry, they look like columns, but they're rows. And just give it a pull, make sure that you don't have any slack in there. And now if you flip to the back, it's a little bit easier to see the columns here, or the rows. We're going to then make a little U-turn here, like we did when we were making the ladder stitch. And we're going to go through the 2nd row of 8O seed beads. And flip to the front. And we're ready to add our 2nd layer of embellishment, or our 2nd row here. It's kind of like a layer because you're going to be working down towards the end and sort of layering these. So we're going to start here by picking up 4 of our 11O seed beads. And then we don't really have to count the rows of the 8Os. We only have to go through the center 8O in the row of 8Os directly below where we passed through on the last embellishment. And pull tight. And pick up another 4 of our B color. And now I like to flip to the back for this so you can see the ladder stitch really well. And go through that 2nd column or row of your 8O seed beads. Give that a little tug and move down to the 3rd row of 8Os. 3rd row in that ladder stitch. Give it a pull. I just always like to give it a nice little tight tug and make sure everything is nice and snug so we don't have any slack. And back to the front here. And I'm going to repeat the first embellishment I did. So I've got 1 of my A's, 1 of my crystals, another 2 of the A color. Pass through the 8O directly below the last 8O that I passed through. 2 of the A's, 1 of the crystals, another 1 of the A color seed beads. And I like to flip to the back here and through that 3rd row of 8Os where I started this step. And moving on to the 4th row now. And we're going to just repeat that again, same step, with my bead color. So with my bead color, I'm only picking up 4 of that color, and then passing through, again, passing through that center 8-0 right below where we passed through on the last step. So I'm going to continue like this and keep embellishing the surface of my ladder stitch until I get to the end, and then I will be ready to add my clasp. Once we have the embellishment done on the top of our ladder stitch, all we have to do now is add our clasp. So I chose to use this clasp, the 10mm cabochon, the infinite clasp with the 10mm cabochon. And I went ahead and already pre-glued this cabochon into the clasp. And if you're not familiar with how to do that, you're just going to do a dab of glue in the bezel, and Loctite works pretty well. Just a little bit of dab of glue, put that in there, let it dry overnight, and then you're all set. I like to glue the clasp in, or the cabochon into the clasp first. It just makes it a little bit easier to work with. For me, it works better that way. So I went ahead and cut myself a new little piece of thread. I tied off all my thread ends here on the bracelet, and I still have some little things to burn down, so I'll take care of all of that at the end when I'm done. To add my clasp, I'm going to simply go through the center 8-0 in the last row of my ladder stitch. I'm going to pick up one of my seed beads, one of the 11-0s, and it doesn't matter what color, but I'm going to use the color that looks the closest to the ladder stitch. And then I'm going to pass through my clasp, and for this particular clasp, I have a little jump ring here, a little soldered jump ring that's actually attached to the clasp. So I'm going to pass through that ring, and then I'm going to pick up another 11-0 seed bead and pass through that center 8-0 again. And then I'm going to go through this, through these seed beads and the clasp again to reinforce it, and just to make sure that this is reinforced. It's always good because when you are adding a clasp on like this, you want to make sure that the part of the bracelet that's going to get the most wear and tear, that's going to move around the most, gets that extra security. So even though the thread holds up pretty well, adding some extra thread through there by just retracing your footsteps 2 or 3 times is really going to help. So now my thread that I was just working with here is coming out the opposite side of that 8-0 where I started. So I don't want to tie my knot over the seed bead here in the center. So I'm going to go through the next seed bead here and pass through the next row down of my 8-0s and come back to this center seed bead here by passing through just that first seed bead on the other side. And then what I've got here is my 2 threads, my 2 ends coming out in between the same 2 beads. So they're in the same little space between the beads, and that's where I want to tie my knot. And that will hide my knot really well. I'll go left over right, and then I'll do a little right over left, basically a square knot. Take my thread through my project a little bit more just to hide those ends a little bit farther. And then once I am done, I will tie that, or I already tied it off, I will burn that down with my thread burner. So I'll just pass through here one more time here through that bead. I'll go back through this row. That just helps me hide my tail thread a little bit better. and then I'll burn that down. And any other little threads that you have from where you cut off your thread previously, you can burn that down. I tend to leave my thread ends a bit on the long side. I think I have another one in here somewhere. Yep, I have one over here. I tend to leave them a bit on the long side, and if I don't have my thread burner on me, and then burn them down later. So you can always do that. So now I'm going to go ahead and just tuck this other thread in and burn that down, and then I will attach the clasp, the other side of the clasp, to the end over here, and I will use the exact same technique. I have the same little ring here on this other side of the clasp. All I need to do is make sure that I have it facing the right way when I attach it. So if you need to put your clasp together so you're sure that you know how it works, take it apart and then just simply move it down. And then you'll be sure to get it facing the right way. You want to make sure that if you are using one of these little push clasps, that the little bent part up here where you're going to actually push it is facing up towards you, that's facing the top of the bracelet. And the ring that you're attaching to is actually on the bottom, closer to the bottom of the bracelet, sort of facing on the same side as your bottom here, as your ladder stitch. So just a little tip there to make sure that you get that on the right way. And of course you can always take your needle and thread through and test it out before you tie off your thread. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this clasp up and burn down my threads, and then my bracelet will be all done. I hope you enjoyed making the Arctic Waves bracelet. If you're looking for some more tutorials on bracelets or any kind of jewelry that you can make yourself, subscribe to our channel and turn on your notifications. We'll let you know as soon as we have a new video that you're probably going to love just as much as this one.